Ever felt like someone underestimated you? Thought you'd beg after a breakup? Well, think again. I packed my bags, walked out the door, and found something I never expected: true strength. Want to know how to reclaim your power after a breakup and never look back? Stay tuned to discover the secrets you won't want to miss. I remember the moment so clearly, standing there with my bags packed, looking back at a life I was supposed to hold on to. He thought I'd crumble, that I'd beg him to stay, that I'd feel lost without him. But in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't the person he thought I was. I wasn't defined by his love, nor was my happiness tied to his approval. As I walked out that door, I left behind not just him, but the version of myself that thought I couldn't stand on my own. The first few days were tough, like a storm cloud that wouldn't quite pass. I questioned everything. Did I make the right choice? Was I being too hasty? But then I started to feel something I hadn't in a long time: peace. It was quiet. I didn't have to explain myself, apologize for my needs, or beg for affection. Slowly, I learned to fill my own cup, finding joy in small moments, waking up with no worries, cooking a meal just for me, taking long walks in the evening air. As the days passed, I found strength in the silence. I began to rebuild the parts of me that had been neglected. And eventually, the uncertainty faded. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And that was the greatest revelation. I was better off on my own. Not just surviving, but finally living. Looking back, I understand now that the breakup wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more important: my journey back to myself. No longer dependent on anyone else for my happiness or self-worth, I realized I had all the power I ever needed. It was always inside me. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away again. So, to anyone else out there who feels lost or underestimated, take that step. Pack your bags, walk out that door, and never look back. Because the best version of you is waiting on the other side. As the weeks passed, I started to notice how much lighter I felt. The weight of his expectations, the constant emotional push and pull, it all began to dissolve. I didn't have to be anyone other than myself. I could wear my quirks proudly, laugh without fear of judgment, and most importantly, I learned to trust my own instincts again. I began doing things I had long forgotten I loved. I rediscovered old hobbies: painting, reading, hiking, and I even took up a few new ones. It wasn't just about filling time. It was about reconnecting with the person I used to be before I got caught up in the idea of us. I found freedom in the quiet moments, in being alone without feeling lonely. It felt empowering. Then one day, a message came through, his name lit up on my screen. At first, my heart skipped a beat, my mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. But instead of feeling that old rush of desperation, I felt nothing. No longing, no confusion. Just a calm sense of knowing who I was and what I deserved. I took a deep breath. And without hesitation, I deleted the message. I didn't need answers anymore. I didn't need closure from him. I had already given myself the closure I needed. The truth was clear. The best part of my life was waiting ahead of me, not behind me. I stood tall, proud of the person I had become. The person who had chosen herself, the person who had walked away and never looked back. And in that moment, I knew that everything was going to be okay, better than okay. It was going to be amazing. It was time to move forward, and I was ready for whatever came next. Months went by, and life started to feel like a brand new chapter one had never expected to write. I was no longer carrying the emotional baggage of a past relationship. I realized how much I had stifled myself in that relationship, how many of my dreams, ambitions, and desires had been set aside for someone else's comfort. But now, with all that behind me, I felt a sense of empowerment that I hadn't experienced in years. I started exploring new places, meeting new people, and even saying yes to opportunities I'd once been too afraid to pursue. One night, I found myself sitting at a cafe, sipping coffee, and talking to a stranger about life, love, and everything in between. There was a freedom in that conversation, no pressure. No expectations. It was just two people, connecting over shared experiences and dreams. For the first time in so long, I felt like I could breathe freely without anyone's shadow hanging over me. The world felt vast, open, and filled with endless possibilities. It wasn't just about dating or relationships. It was about embracing the fullness of life, in all its raw and beautiful complexity. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected message from an old friend. Someone who had been there for me during the hard times, someone I had lost touch with over the years. They asked how I was doing, and after some thought, I decided to meet up. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a reminder of all the good, solid connections I still had. As we sat together, I realized something else. I didn't need validation from a partner to feel whole. My worth wasn't determined by anyone but me. The relationships that mattered most were the ones built on mutual respect, kindness, and honesty. Those were the ones I valued, and somewhere in that conversation, I felt a shift. I was no longer looking for something to complete me. I was whole, and anything that came into my life now would only add to the fullness I had already found within myself. I didn't know exactly where life was taking me, but I knew one thing for sure. I was finally in control. And that was the most liberating feeling of all. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. As the seasons changed, so did I. What had once been a painful chapter was now a distant memory, a lesson learned. I looked back with gratitude, not regret. The time I had spent healing, rediscovering myself, and growing had shaped me into a version of me I had never truly known existed. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of a mirror, a full year after I had walked out that door. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me, not because she was unfamiliar, but because she was so much more than I had ever allowed myself to be. Her eyes were bright, full of purpose. Her smile was no longer the mask I used to wear, but a genuine reflection of someone who had finally embraced her own strength. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving, finding joy in the simple things, celebrating my own accomplishments, and never settling for less than what I deserved. One evening, a friend invited me to a gathering, something I would have hesitated to attend a year ago. It was at a quiet local art gallery, surrounded by people who spoke passionately about their crafts, their lives, and their dreams. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like an outsider. I was part of something, not because I was seeking approval, but because I had finally learned to embrace my own uniqueness. Amid the conversations, I met someone, a man who, like me, had been through his own share of heartache. But unlike before, I wasn't looking for someone to fill a void. We talked about life, art, and the beauty of vulnerability. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people connecting over shared experiences. For the first time, I realized that love, when it comes, doesn't have to complete you, it just adds a little more color to an already full picture. I left the gallery that night with a sense of calm, not just about the possibility of love, but about life itself. I no longer felt the need to rush, to search for anything or anyone. I had become whole on my own, and anything that came now would only enhance what I had already built within myself. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose and clarity I hadn't known before. I was no longer defined by the past, or the relationships I had walked away from. I was defined by my choices, my strength, and the life I was creating for myself, one step at a time. The journey wasn't over. But I had already come so far, and I knew this was just the beginning. The world was full of possibilities, and I was ready to embrace them all, on my own terms. A few months later, I stood at the edge of a new adventure. What began as a painful ending had blossomed into something unexpected: freedom, growth, and a newfound love for life itself. The empty space I had once feared was now a place where I could breathe deeply, without restriction. I had spent years waiting for the right person to make me feel whole. But in the end, I realized that the only person who could do that was me. I had become my own source of strength, my own comfort, and my own happiness. It wasn't always easy, but each step forward felt like a victory, a small triumph in reclaiming the power I had once given away. And now, with every sunrise, I faced the world with a sense of confidence and peace I'd never known before. Then one morning, as I was going about my routine, a familiar face appeared on my social media feed, his. The very same person I had walked away from, the one who had underestimated me. My heart didn't skip a beat, no racing thoughts or waves of nostalgia, just a calm recognition. He had changed too. It seemed. His message wasn't apologetic, nor was it filled with regret. It was simple, a check-in, an acknowledgement of the time that had passed. I stared at the screen, unsure of what to do. Part of me wondered if this was a test, an attempt to pull me back into the familiar. But instead of feeling tempted, I felt a sense of gratitude. He had been a part of my journey, but I was no longer the person I had been when we were together. I had evolved, and so had he. I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness, but because I knew my worth now. I had no need to revisit old wounds, or seek validation from someone who no longer had a place in my life. I had learned to honor my past, not to dwell in it. As I closed my phone, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't angry, nor was I sad. I simply felt whole. This wasn't about cutting ties, or holding on to grudges. It was about accepting that some chapters were meant to end, not for the sake of bitterness, but for the sake of growth. Later that day, I took a walk through the city, my footsteps light. I passed by places that once felt like traps, moments that were heavy with memories I had tried to forget. But now, they felt different, empty, yes, but in the best way possible. They no longer held power over me. They were simply places in my past, part of the map that had led me here, to where I was today. The future was wide open, and I realized that it didn't matter who I was before or where I had come from. What mattered was who I was becoming. I was no longer the woman who waited for someone else to define her worth. I was the woman who had found herself, standing tall, proud, and ready to step into whatever came next. And this time, it would be on my terms. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of excitement for the first time in a long while. Life had a way of surprising you, but now I was ready to embrace every twist and turn. I was the author of my story, and the next chapter. It was going to be nothing short of extraordinary. As the months continued to unfold, I found myself standing at the crossroads of a life I had never imagined possible. The more I embraced the journey of rediscovery, the more I realized how much I had underestimated my own strength. Each new challenge, each new encounter, no longer felt like an obstacle, but an opportunity for growth. It was a powerful shift, one I never could have experienced if I had stayed in the place of comfort. Stuck in the past, but life, as always, has a way of throwing curveballs. One evening, while working on a project I had taken up on my own, I received an unexpected call. It was from an old friend, a reminder of a life I had lived before everything had changed. We hadn't talked in years, but her voice on the other end of the line was like a breath of fresh air. "Hey," she said, her tone warm and familiar. "I know it's been a while, but I've been following your journey, and I wanted to say I'm proud of you. You've really come into your own." Her words felt like a balm for the soul. I hadn't realized how much I missed the connections that had once been so important to me. I realized that sometimes, when we distance ourselves from the past, we forget the good parts, the ones that helped shape us into who we are now. We talked for hours, catching up on everything. She told me about her life, her challenges, and how she had learned to live on her own terms as well. And in that conversation, something clicked. It wasn't just about moving on from the past, it was about embracing the entire journey, the people, the moments, the lessons that had brought me to this point. As we said our goodbyes, I realized how much I had grown. I wasn't just surviving the aftermath of a breakup, I was thriving. I was rebuilding relationships that mattered, nurturing the connections I had let slip away during the years of emotional turmoil. I wasn't afraid of opening myself up again, whether to new friendships or new possibilities, and then, just when I thought I had everything figured out, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived in the mail. My heart skipped when I saw the handwriting, his. For a moment, I froze. What did he want now? Was this another attempt to reclaim what we had lost? I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was no longer the person I had been. I had nothing left to prove. Slowly, I opened the letter, and inside were just a few simple words. I hope you're happy. I hope you found what you were looking for. Take care. It was the closure I hadn't known I needed. No grand apologies. No lingering questions, just a quiet acknowledgement that we were both on separate paths now. And in that moment, I felt a weight lift off my chest. There were no regrets, no unfinished business. Just a quiet understanding that some things are meant to end, and that's okay. I smiled, placing the letter down on the table. It was time to move forward, without looking back. The journey was far from over, and I wasn't waiting for anything or anyone to catch up with me. I had become the person I was always meant to be. And now, I was ready to write the next chapter of my life, one that was all mine. As the days passed, the world around me continued to evolve. I kept walking this path of self-discovery, each day feeling like a new opportunity to stretch the boundaries of who I was becoming. My routine had become something I cherished, not because it was predictable, but because it was mine. I had built it carefully, layer by layer, from the lessons of the past and the hopes for the future. And for the first time in a long time, I was content. One afternoon, I decided to take a solo trip to a nearby town I'd never visited. There was something liberating about being in a place where no one knew my name, where I wasn't tethered to the expectations of anyone but myself. It was a small, sleepy town with cobbled streets and charming cafes. I wandered through the market square, lost in the simplicity of it all. There was a peacefulness in these quiet moments, no rush, no obligations, just me and the world. As I sat in a cafe, sipping a cup of coffee, I struck up a conversation with an older woman sitting next to me. She told me about her life, her travels, her family. Her words resonated with me, as if she was speaking the wisdom I had been seeking for so long. Life, she said, isn't about finding someone to love you, it's about learning to love yourself first. Only then will you know what real love feels like. I thanked her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. It was as if the universe had sent her to remind me that I was on the right path, one of self-love, growth, and understanding. By the time I left the town, I felt lighter, more at peace with myself than ever before. It wasn't that I was suddenly free of doubts or challenges, but I had learned to face them head-on, knowing that every step I took was part of the beautiful journey of becoming the person I was meant to be. Life after that solo trip was full of new experiences. I had begun to reframe how I saw the world. Everything felt different. The people I met, the moments I shared, they all held a deeper meaning now. I had stopped searching for validation outside of myself. I understood that fulfillment didn't come from external sources. It was cultivated from within, nurtured by the choices I made every day. I started taking up hobbies I had long since forgotten. Photography, for instance, had always been a passion of mine, but it had been pushed to the background for years. Now, camera in hand, I explored the world in ways I never had before. I found beauty in the mundane, the sunlight filtering through the trees, the colors of the sky at dusk, the small moments that others often overlooked. With each photo I took, I felt more in tune with myself, more connected to the world around me. One evening, I met a man at an art exhibit, a fellow photographer. He wasn't the kind of person I would have typically been drawn to. But there was something about his quiet, thoughtful demeanor that intrigued me. We struck up a conversation about our love for capturing moments in time. There was no rush, no expectations, just two people sharing their passion for something they both loved. As we spoke, I realized that I wasn't looking for someone to save me or complete me. I wasn't looking for validation or reassurance. I was simply enjoying a genuine connection. And that was all I needed at that moment. As the night wore on, we exchanged numbers, and I walked home with a sense of contentment. Not because I had met someone new, but because I was no longer searching for anything. I had found my own peace, and anything that came into my life from here on out would simply be an added bonus. It had been nearly a year since I walked away from my past, and the changes in my life were nothing short of remarkable. I had not only rediscovered myself, but I had transformed into someone stronger, more grounded, and more confident than I had ever been. I no longer craved approval from others. My worth was rooted in who I was, not what I did for others, or what I allowed them to do for me. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror, admiring the woman I had become. She was confident, comfortable in her own skin, and unafraid of what the future might hold. I had faced my fears, let go of old wounds, and embraced the freedom that came with it. There was a quiet power in that. I no longer felt the need to prove myself to anyone. Least of all to myself. I decided to take a leap of faith and start a new project, something that had been on my mind for a while. I wanted to help others who were going through similar struggles, who were trying to rebuild their lives after a difficult chapter. I began writing a blog about my experiences, what I had learned, the hurdles I had overcome, and the tools that had helped me get to where I was now. It wasn't just about sharing my story. It was about offering hope, giving people a glimpse of what was possible after pain, after heartbreak. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people all over the world, thanking me for being honest and vulnerable. I realized that my journey wasn't just for me, it was for everyone who needed to hear that healing was possible. That happiness was something you could create for yourself, no matter what had happened in your past. As I continued to write and connect with people, something inside me began to shift again. What I had once considered a painful experience had now become my greatest teacher. I had learned so much about myself, about resilience, strength, and the beauty of the human spirit. But I wasn't done yet. There was more to explore, more to discover. One day, while reflecting on my journey, I realized I had been so focused on healing that I had forgotten to simply enjoy life. I wasn't rushing to fix anything anymore, but there was a part of me that had forgotten the joy of living in the present. I decided to start living more fully, without fear or hesitation. I booked a spontaneous trip to a foreign country, something I had always dreamed of doing, but never had the courage to act on. I didn't know what to expect, but I was ready for whatever came my way. The trip was everything I had hoped for and more. It wasn't just the adventure, or the new places I discovered. It was the feeling of being free from all expectations, of being fully present in the moment. I wandered the streets of the city, tasting new foods, meeting new people, and finding beauty in the unfamiliar. I came back from the trip feeling more alive than ever before, with a renewed sense of purpose. I had remembered how to truly live, not just survive. Not just heal, but live. When I returned home from my travels, I was a different person, one who had learned to embrace uncertainty, to trust the process of life, and to take risks. The world no longer felt like a place of fear, but a playground full of endless opportunities. I was no longer the woman I had been before, the one trapped by past wounds. I had shed that skin and emerged as someone new, someone unafraid to follow her own path, with this new sense of freedom, I continued to expand my horizons. I took on more projects, explored new interests, and met people who inspired me. And through it all, I began to realize that the true magic of life wasn't found in the big moments, but in the quiet, everyday ones, the morning coffee, the laughter shared with friends, the moments of solitude that allowed me to reconnect with myself, and perhaps, just perhaps, I had come full circle. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me anymore. I had found completeness in myself. But I knew now that the right person, someone who was also whole and content in their own life, could add to the beauty I had already created. I wasn't waiting for anything. I was simply living, fully and completely, the next chapter. It wasn't something I could plan, and that was the beauty of it. Life would unfold as it was meant to, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. Because for the first time in my life, I truly understood, the best is yet to come. The weeks passed, and the changes within me were becoming more evident. I had never imagined how freeing it could feel to let go of the past completely. I was no longer burdened by the weight of unresolved issues, or the need to explain myself to others. The journey of rebuilding my life was more about redefining what mattered to me than about focusing on what I had lost. The more I embraced this newfound peace, the more I realized how powerful it was to just be. To simply exist, without constantly striving to meet others' expectations. I started spending time doing things that made me feel alive, whether it was walking through nature, reading books, or painting. I wasn't doing them for anyone else. I was doing them for me. It was liberating to experience the world with no strings attached, no pressure to fulfill some grand vision. One evening, I had a conversation with an old friend from the past, someone I had known long before everything had shifted in my life. She was the kind of friend I had once relied on for validation. We had shared laughs, tears, and many memories, but over the years, we'd drifted apart. As we spoke, I realized how much I had changed. We both had. The old dynamics between us were gone. It wasn't a bad thing, it was just a sign that we had both evolved. I can hear it in your voice, she said, almost wistfully. You're different. In a good way, I smiled. Grateful for her recognition. This was a moment that solidified something important. I had become someone I could be proud of, someone who had learned to walk her own path. There was no need for approval anymore, because I had already given myself permission to live the life I wanted. A few months later, I found myself standing at the edge of a new chapter, one that I had not anticipated. The project I had started, the blog that had started as an outlet for my own healing, had evolved into something much bigger. It wasn't just a personal project anymore. It had become a platform for others to share their stories and their journeys of self-discovery. I began hosting weekly virtual meetings with people from all walks of life who were going through similar struggles, whether it was heartbreak, loss, or the process of self-rediscovery. It was incredible to hear their stories, to witness their growth, and to be a part of their healing. I realized that by helping others, I was also helping myself. The circle of connection had expanded, and I felt more purpose than ever. I started collaborating with other creators who shared similar values, expanding the reach of my message. Together, we began creating online courses and content designed to help people not only heal but thrive after major life changes. We talked about resilience, self-love, and the art of living authentically. The response was overwhelming. People were hungry for the tools to change their own lives, and I was honored to be part of their journey. One evening, I received a message from someone who had been following my work for months. She wrote that she had been inspired to finally take the leap and leave a toxic relationship she had been stuck in for years. I realized I deserved more, she said. And I finally believed it because of you. Those words were more powerful than anything I could have imagined. It wasn't about the number of followers or the popularity of the project. It was about knowing that I had made a real difference in someone's life. That was the moment I knew I had found my true purpose. I had spent years thinking that healing was a linear journey, that one day I would wake up and everything would be perfect. But life had taught me that healing wasn't about reaching some fixed endpoint. It was about embracing the ebb and flow of the process, understanding that growth was cyclical. Sometimes, you felt like you were moving forward, and other times, you'd take a step back. But each step, no matter how small, was a step toward something greater. I began to approach life with a new mindset. I wasn't striving for perfection, I was striving for authenticity. That shift was monumental. I wasn't just healing anymore. I was living. Fully. Unapologetically. As the year came to an end, I reflected on how far I had come. I was no longer the person I had been when I first left. I had built a life I loved. Full of purpose, joy, and deep connections. I was grateful for the lessons of the past, but I wasn't living in them. I had taken everything I had learned and transformed it into something beautiful. I started thinking about the future, not with fear, but with excitement. I had so many dreams still to fulfill, so many places to go, and so many people to meet. My life had become an open canvas, and I was ready to create my masterpiece. One day, as I stood in front of my mirror, I caught a glimpse of the woman I had become. She was strong, independent, and unapologetically herself. I had built this version of me with intention, and she was everything I had ever hoped to be. One morning, as I sat at my kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea, I received a letter from someone unexpected. It was from him, my ex. For the longest time, I had wondered if I would ever hear from him again. And when the letter arrived, I hesitated. But I knew this moment wasn't about him, it was about me. I had worked hard to heal, to grow, and to let go. Whatever was inside this letter couldn't change that. I opened it slowly, reading each word carefully. The letter was short, but it carried the weight of years. He apologized for the hurt he had caused, for the things left unsaid. And then he thanked me, for the lessons, for the love, and for the strength to walk away when things were no longer right. The letter ended with one simple sentence. I hope you find everything you're looking for. I sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in. There was no anger, no lingering resentment. Just a quiet understanding that we had both moved on, that we had both found peace in our own way. His letter was a sign that I had truly closed that chapter of my life, and that was enough. I put the letter down, smiling softly to myself. I wasn't waiting for anything from him anymore. I was living my life, filled with love and purpose. The future was mine, and it was full of possibilities. A few months passed, and life continued to surprise me in the most unexpected ways. I had built a solid foundation. One that allowed me to embrace change without fear. The idea of a perfect life had long since been replaced by an understanding that life was about experiencing it all, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. One day, while I was out running errands, I bumped into someone from my past, an old acquaintance I hadn't seen in years. He was the kind of person who had always been part of the periphery of my life, but never someone I had expected to cross paths with again. We exchanged pleasantries, catching up on what had been happening since we last spoke. As we talked, I realized something important. I wasn't the same person I had been when I knew him. I wasn't even the same person I had been when I last bumped into him years ago. I had transformed, and it was evident in the way I interacted with the world. I no longer relied on external validation to feel good about myself. I wasn't defined by the past or the people in it. I was defined by who I had become, and that was a person I was proud of. As we parted ways, he smiled at me and said, "You've changed. In a good way." And I knew, deep down, that the journey wasn't just about leaving behind the things that hurt me. It was about embracing the person I had always been meant to become, With that, I walked forward, embracing whatever the next chapter held, knowing that it would be just as beautiful and unpredictable as the one before. Final thought. As I reflect on this journey, I realize that the most important lesson I've learned is the power of letting go and embracing who you truly are. Life isn't about perfection, it's about growth, change, and the courage to keep moving forward. No matter where you are on your journey, remember that you have the strength within you to create the life you deserve. If this story resonated with you, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, so you don't miss any of my upcoming content. Let's continue growing together. Stay strong, and keep shining.